shall die.
So, I may have fallen back into the gacha hole again. Along with playing some Star Rail, I've gotten back into ZZZ. But you know what? No excuses. The game has a badass fox girl who's either shorter than you or taller depending on if you count her ears or not. And because I managed to actually pull said fox girl, got this guy for free, and happens to have a maxed out Soukaku, on a whim I added ZZZ to the last poll, not really expecting much. After all, Stardust Crusaders was already on the list, so I was kind of preparing for that. Only for Section 6 to kinda take the entire race, which just means I can save JoJo for later. Oh, and this should go without saying, but big spoilers for 1.4 of ZZZ. So I feel like before we get into the characters, we need a bit of a breakdown on what exactly is going on in ZZZ. Like, what are these guys? Why is Nicole always broke? And what the hell is a hollow? This is the city of New Eridu, which right now happens to be the last city on Earth that I'm aware of. Home to most everyone that is still alive, and even those that live beyond the city limits still live relatively close by. But how did things get like this? On an entire planet, how could there only be one city left? Well, that is thanks to this, Hollow Zero, the first and largest known hollow that destroyed the city of Eridu when it formed, with New Eridu being built by anyone who managed to survive. And hollows are very strange. Inside, space and time don't function properly, the landscape can change suddenly, and this alone could be very dangerous, causing buildings to collapse or worse. But the real danger of hollows only rears its head once you've been in there for a little too long. A person, or even objects that stay inside of a hollow for too long, are subjected to ether corruption. Machinery can go wild, ignoring wireless or even manual inputs, with crystals and spikes forming all over their surfaces. And for people, this is much worse. Ether corruption rapidly mutates the body, eventually turning you into a monster known as an ethereal. And once you get to a certain stage of corruption, it's too late. There's no cure for ether corruption, other than just leaving the hollow before you reach your limit. And the deeper you go into a hollow, the faster you're going to reach that limit, since the closer you get to the core, the more concentrated the etheric energies that cause ether corruption get in the first place. Hollows also have a tendency to grow, and to stop this, New Eridu Public Security, along with agencies like HAND and New Eridu Defense Force, periodically send forces in there to slay ethereals and gather ether to power the city. This is still extremely dangerous, and not to mention illegal for anyone not authorized to enter a hollow. But despite the danger and legality, there are always those willing to brave the danger for a chance to make it rich. Not only could you get valuables or even lost tech, but some people are willing to pay top denny for materials or data gathered from inside hollows. These people are known as Hollow Raiders, and while I would love to talk about the Cunning Hares and their gold digger with a heart of gold leader Nicole, who despite always trying to get rich, ends up broke because she blows all of her money donating to orphanages and taking those said orphans on shopping trips. Not to mention, she also pays her team extremely well. So if this video does well, I will cover the Cunning Hares too. I'm not sure what the goal is like, but just make it do well and I will make the Cunning Hares. Deal? Good. Anyways, instead we are going to be looking at one of the groups that is actually allowed to enter into hollows, a small 4-person team from HAND called Section 6. Consisting of the always hungry Soukaku, an Oni girl who despite her size and general lack of knowledge is great at spotting lies, and tearing through the entire office's snack supply in under a day. Harumasa, who I'll be honest, I thought was going to be the least interesting character here, but with his constant battles both with layered PTSD nightmares and a chronic illness, I'm surprised he ever makes it into the office, let alone every day. The mom of the group and actual legal guardian of Soukaku, Yanagi, who does her best to keep everyone focused and actually working. And lastly, the leader and founder of Section 6, a character who actually got locked out of the last beta because no one was playing anyone but her. One of the city's strongest void hunters, Miyabi Hoshimi. I'm sorry if I'm butchering her last name. And as all the strongest characters do, Miyabi has her own tragic backstory and is very Virgil-coded. But we're gonna save Miyabi for last. Not only because she's the strongest, but because I think her build is actually the most straightforward and was the easiest to put together, while still having a few twists that I didn't quite expect when making her. So instead, we're going to start with the little blue food vacuum that is Soukaku. Soukaku partially grew up outside of New Eridu with a clan of Oni who wanted nothing more than to enter New Eridu as citizens. Being outside the city meant that food, along with other important resources, were scarce, and Soukaku spent much of her time in a state of starvation, always hungry and always looking for food. And because of the lack of resources, the Oni attempted to gain citizenship in New Eridu. This was unfortunately rejected and led to a small war between the two sides, taking the lives of many, including the leader of the Oni clan, who happens to be Soukaku's father, leaving her elder sister to become the new clan leader. Now this war did come to an end, but I'm gonna save the actual details of that for later. And instead, let's take a look at what our options for Soukaku are, because unless you're using my super old Oni lineage, Oni isn't a playable option in D&D as much as I would like it to be. So looking at Soukaku and the other 2 Oni we see, I think there are really only 2 options. First are Tieflings, which could work given their multi-tone skin, which technically only ranges from normal human skin tones to red, but in no way anyone's going to listen to that in the first place. And they do have tails, which Soukaku does have. And while the Tiefling does fit for the looks in ZZZ, the Oni here don't really have any special powers, no magical abilities from their blood, other than just being extra strong. And while later on Soukaku does have some ice abilities, I want to see what her other option is first. And for a clan-based society of nomadic and strong warriors, the orcs fit into that really nicely. They might lack tails or the varied skin tones, but visual stuff is a lot easier to reflavor than full-on mechanics. And sure, orcs might not have magic, but they do have muscles and the ability to know you to death once per rest. And I think because of the better mechanical and cultural fit, the orc is going to be the best choice for Soukaku. Plus it does make something a little easier with a different character down the line. So with her species out of the way, Soukaku does need a background. And growing up away from civilization, so hungry that she tries to eat a gun, and really anything else she can get her hands on, there is no better background for Soukaku than the Wayfarer. Yeah, she has a stable home with as much food as she could ever want now, but just a few years ago that wasn't the case. Now Soukaku, despite arguably still being a child, at most a teenager, is actually a very capable fighter. She swings around this giant fan axe thing that kind of makes me think of Obito's Gunbai from Naruto, this thing here. And I mean, just look at this thing, it can't be all that light. She's gonna need some serious muscle in that tiny body of hers to use it properly. But I think she makes up for that by not having a whole lot of brains to go along with it. I'm pretty sure Yanagi only brings her to the office so she stays out of trouble and doesn't try to eat like a sparkler or something. And that brings us to Soukaku's stats, which should be pretty easy given what we know about her. I.e., she is physically strong as Oni tend to be, they are a warrior culture, and typically in these kinds of settings, Oni are just naturally strong and kind of bulky, meaning a high strength and con first. She also has a very good nose for sniffing out both food and lies, despite how naive she might seem, and somehow she's not a klutz. Sure, she's not doing ballet or anything, but at the very least she's not falling on her ass whenever she spins like this, so that's fine. And so far, Soukaku actually has some pretty well-rounded stats, until we look at her intelligence and charisma. Yes, she's a sweet girl and even has a fan club as part of Section 6 whole being famous thing, but I don't think you'd send Soukaku in to negotiate with anyone, unless they have a soft spot for kids, I guess. And yeah, her intelligence is low. She does not have a whole lot of brain juice in her head. I'm pretty sure she just stores more snacks there. Now when it comes to figuring out more about Soukaku after she was taken in by Yanagi, there is one thing holding us back there. She's a 4-star character, meaning no trailers, no big cutscenes with her like holding up a building or something, so a lot of what we can go off of is just gameplay. And a lot of the time characters in-game are a lot weaker than they are in lore, but I think we do have something that we can at least use to give us a good idea of where to start. And that's going to be her ult, or whatever it's called in ZZZ, I'm going to say it's an ult, where she puts on this mask, enters a buff state, and does this spinning attack into a slam that makes an icy vortex around her that holds her enemies in place. And this does give us a few hints, again with her swinging around that big axe fan like a toy, but she also has something like an icy aura around her that slows her enemies and lets her allies get an easy shot in. That's also kind of her job in the game, where she's used to buff her allies and set up ice combos with her vortex. And this really only leaves us with, again, 2 options. First, we have the Rune Knight Fighter, where she would get access to the Cloud and Frost runes early on for help protecting herself and her teammates, along with some other features like Giant's Might and Great Stature that make her bigger. Now you could argue that her using the mask is invoking a rune, but none of those really fit her playstyle. and are more about buffing certain stats and skill checks, not channeling those runes into, say, summoning a storm around yourself to buff you and your allies, while also hitting your enemies with a debuff. And this is where the second, much more fitting option comes in, a barbarian subclass that I have yet to see anyone actually play, the Storm Herald. These barbarians turn their anger not into great strength, but use it instead to channel elemental storms, summoning scorching desert sandstorms, thunderstorms at sea, and the bitter cold winds of the tundra. And for obvious reasons, we are going to focus on that last one. And while it's not a perfect one-to-one fit, Wizards of the Coast seems adamant about not letting ice magic be anywhere near as cool as fire magic. So Soukaku is going to be a Storm Herald Barbarian, meaning she buffs her allies with temp HP from her Storm Aura, gets resistance to cold damage from Storm Soul, can share that same resistance with her team via Storm Shield, and finally, the most important thing, she can choose one enemy in her aura and decide that they don't get to move with Raging Storm, setting them up for her team to collapse on and dump all of their ults onto. And Raging Storm is the final feature for the subclass all the way at level 14, but this is only a few features. She also needs to cover, well, everything else, including her actual fighting style with her Gunbai. And the best weapon to actually fit the profile of this thing has to be the Great Axe, and because barbarians get weapon mastery, Soukaku gets to use the Cleave Mastery trait, so she can spin to win once per turn. This also goes great with Reckless Attack, because spinning attacks historically aren't all that safe or good to use, leaving you wide open for a counterattack. But on the other hand, they hit really hard with all that momentum they build up, making it a great reason for Soukaku to pick up Great Weapon Master at level 4 so she can hit even harder. And along the same line, she gets things like Brutal Strike at level 9 and 13, along with some ASIs to bump her strength and con up at level 8 and 12. But there is one more thing I want to cover, and it's something that I'm gonna have to cover on everybody, since outside of a few characters like Nekomata that do assault damage, pretty much every character in ZZZ has an element that they not only have special things for, like again with Soukaku and her Ice Vortex, but they also coat their weapon in that very same element. And for this reason, I actually took Soukaku all the way up to level 16 for one last ASI. And she's going to use that to grab the gift of the Chromatic Dragon, letting her touch a simple or martial weapon and imbue it with a chosen element. Why do I feel like I'm going to be repeating that a lot this episode? Now, Soukaku might not deal the most damage, but she does have some really strong swings with her Gunbai after mixing in Great Weapon Master, Brutal Strike, the Rage bonus, and the gift of the Chromatic Dragon for, let's see. Oh, okay. So the Great Axe base for her Gunbai does 1d12 plus her Strength mod of 4, plus another 4 from Rage, plus 1d10 from Brutal Strike, plus 5 from Great Weapon Master, and lastly 1d4 from Gift of the Chromatic Dragon, for an average of 28 damage. Another 28 for extra attack, and thanks to Cleave, once per turn she gets to make another attack against a second creature near the first one for 24 damage since that one doesn't add her Strength mod. Oh, and all 3 of these attacks are made at advantage. That is 80 damage per turn with a higher chance to crit. I think there's a reason no one worries about Soukaku getting kidnapped, because every time someone tries, another mugger appears on the missing persons list.
Hungry! Shh.
Hey, just checking in while past me make sure Soukaku doesn't eat everything in my whatever this place is. To remind you that if you like these videos, it would be awesome if you could give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Like I said before, if you guys help this video do well enough, I will cover the Cunning Hairs in a future video, and if you want to have a say in exactly what teams I do make, you can do that on my Patreon. All tiers get to vote in the polls, and that helps point my hyperfixation at whatever goal you guys want the most. Of course, you also get all the characters I make, even the ones that don't make it into the videos, like last week with the Phantom Thieves. Okay, so I know I'm far from the first D&D creator you're going to hear talking about the Wandering Tavern. But for someone like me who struggles with writing storylines or coming up with interesting areas that aren't just like generic magic shop, it comes with so many things that can help you. It has pre-made battle maps so you don't struggle looking through Google for stuff. NPC names, stat blocks, and even tokens, so again, no Google. New magic items to freshen things up, and a bunch of other stuff. You could use it as a mini campaign if you don't want to do anything long term, or just throw it into your pre-existing game as a new location. And this can especially help if you're on the edge of burnout for writing for your campaign, just a few weeks of not having to worry about it really. So if any of that sounds good to you, even just individual parts, you could steal the NPCs if you want, you can use my code GMG at the link below for a 10% discount. Now let's get back to the video. So since we just got done with Soukaku, I think the next option for us is going to be Yanagi. Hey, no, saving you for the end. Wait your turn, Miyabi. Anyways, instead I think we should take a look at Yanagi, Soukaku's, I'm gonna say adopted mom. They live together, she takes care of Soukaku, and Soukaku even ran away at one point. So yeah, mom. Who is not only an ex-soldier for New Eridu, having fought on their side in the war with the Oni, but also the one piece of Section 6 that keeps it standing. Sure, Miyabi could probably parry God and give Virgil a run for his money, but no amount of paperwork is actually getting done if she's the only one there. Soukaku is drawing, and Harumasa is taking his 4th consecutive nap. So a large amount of paperwork is actually done by Yanagi. But let's step back for a minute, back to before Section 6 was formed to when Yanagi was a soldier. The Oni clan and New Eridu have been at war for some time, and despite being on the opposite side, Yanagi is desperately trying to reach the Oni's hideout before they're wiped out, hoping she can broker some sort of peace between the two sides. But before she can, Yanagi runs into a small Oni child trying to eat a gun. Their meeting is unfortunately cut short as Yanagi hears the sound of an incoming mortar strike, and without hesitation, she grabs the Oni girl to protect her. And the next thing she knows, she is being held captive in the Oni hideout, exactly where she wants to be. And with some good negotiation combined with Soukaku vouching for her, Yanagi manages to bring an end to the war. But it's bittersweet at best. Now you might be asking why I bother bringing this up. Well, because between here and here, a big change happens to Yanagi. And if you asked me before I looked into her backstory what species to make her, I would have probably just said human. But that stops being so clear around now. So let's continue where I stopped us. Yanagi was risking her life trying to reach the Oni so she could end the war, trying to make peace now that the old leader, the one who started the war in the first place, was dead, leaving his eldest daughter as the new leader. And she really just wanted what was best for her people, for the war to end and her people to have a home. And the only way for that to happen was for the sickly eldest daughter, the new leader, to entrust her life to Yanagi, through a ritual that not only makes Yanagi the next leader of the Oni, but infuses her human body with the strength of an Oni via her blood, making her something in between a human and an Oni. Now obviously this doesn't do anything to change her appearance, she doesn't change skin color or grow a horn, anything like that. But there are some theories that makes her age slower among other things. So because we made Soukaku, who is a full Oni, into an orc, and Yanagi is at the very least part Oni, I think half orc is our best bet for her species. And obviously the soldier background because, soldier. This gives her Savage Attacker from being a soldier, and Savage Attacks for being a half-orc, along with Relentless Endurance, so she can push herself past her limit once per day. Now that was kind of a lot to go over, so let's speed things up a little bit, because her actual build is super simple, including her stats. A high strength and dex, polearms use strength, and doing maneuvers like this in heels requires some real talent. And I actually think her intelligence should be right around the same as her strength. She's very tactical, figuring out both how to break out of a virtual prison, but break back in to rescue the rest of her team before they all turned into adorable bangboos. Her constitution and charisma are fine, but she never really shows the capacity to take huge hits, and she can say some pretty corny stuff sometimes, leaving her wisdom as her dump stat. I don't really think she's all that bad, but she did trudge into enemy territory with no solid plan on what she was gonna do other than just, hey, you've gotta trust me. And honestly, she's lucky it worked out, or else Section 6 would probably just be Miyabi sitting in a hollow waiting for a challenge. Now putting her stats behind us, let's see how Yanagi handles herself in combat. She fights with a special made Naginata-like polearm, dashing past and through her enemies with a flurry of attacks, each one charged with electricity. She also has two different stances that she swaps between, either using her Naginata fully extended as a polearm, or compacting it to act more like a katana, which in-game gives her a few different buffs depending on how well you can keep her combos going. But here, I think this is a great reason for Yanagi to go into a fighter, because normally in 5e there's no way to really change your stance like this, no way to fully change your playstyle mid-fight. But what fighters can do is change the weapon mastery trait for the weapon you're holding to something else. And yeah, it's not fully changing stances, but it does effectively change how you're hitting them. Because different weapons generally only have one mastery trait, being able to change them is akin to changing weapons. And that alone puts Yanagi at level 9, meaning she gets 3 ASIs, the first of which is going to covering her weapon in lightning, once again by using the gift of the Chromatic Dragon for lightning damage. Then Polearm Master so she can get the most out of her glaive, and Speedy so she can actually keep up with the rest of her team in a fight, or work circles around them in the office. But this does still leave the question of what subclass to give her, which at first might seem a bit hard, but going off of how she plays with a lot of buffs and high mobility, I think there is one thing that fits her really well. A subclass with a mix of martial abilities and spellcasting that can focus solely on self-buffs if need be, and also offer some nice mobility. The Eldritch Knight, with features like Arcane Charge letting Yanagi teleport around whenever she uses Action Surge, along with self-buffing spells like Mage Armor, Blur, Haste, and Elemental Weapon. And while all of this does put Yanagi at level 15, I not only want her last subclass feature, Improved War Magic, but I actually want to make her even more mobile. But not with any monk levels or increase to her base speed. Because at level 19 of Fighter, or any class really, characters get what is called an Epic Boon, which used to be an optional rule way in the back of the DMG. But now, it's a reward for getting to such a high level, and there are a bunch of these to choose from. Each class recommends a different one, but I'm going to be looking at 2 for Yanagi. The Boon of Dimensional Travel, which would let her teleport after making the attack action or casting a spell, or the Boon of Speed, full on increasing her speed by 30 feet, and letting her disengage as a bonus action. And while either of these could work, I want to go more teleporting, because honestly she doesn't need the extra 30 feet of movement. Because Yanagi could cast Haste, teleport 30 feet, dash with her hasted action for 120 feet, bonus action Second Wind to add another 30 feet to that, then Action Surge, teleport 30 feet, and then attack. And if she had Long Strider up before this, those dashes would go from 120 feet to 160. Meaning Yanagi could be as far as 250 feet away from you and you wouldn't be safe from her smacking you in the face. Or if she was fine waiting until next turn so she could dash again with Action Surge, she could move up to 410 feet in one go. Or just bamf around 3 times per turn, attacking 7 times thanks to Polearm Master, or 8 with Haste. But honestly, her damage output without Haste is better, because she can have Elemental Weapon and Gift of the Chromatic Dragon up at the same time. Meaning her glaive does 1d10 slashing damage, plus 2d4 lightning damage, plus 3 for around 15 damage per attack. Multiply that by 6, since one attack is only a 1d4, her output for one round is around 101 damage without any crits. Oh, and I'm not done yet by the way, because Yanagi maxes out her strength with an ASI and Great Weapon Master, so she is adding another 8 damage per attack. Meaning that Yanagi's maximum damage output for 2 rounds back to back, because she has 2 action surges, is 1d10 plus 2d4 plus 5 plus 6 for 23 damage on 6 of the attacks and 20 damage on the bonus action, equaling 158 damage per turn. So unless my math is wrong, which it very well might be, I had to remath the entire movement part of this because I accidentally gave her a 3rd action somehow. But again, if my math is not wrong, that is 1 damage point higher than if she made 8 total attacks using Haste instead of Elemental Weapon. Just 2 turns of Yanagi at her max capacity could almost take out a Tarask, and that's not accounting for any crits. So yeah, no wonder they trusted her to take out the fake Miyabi. She's a blender with legs.
Chief Miyabi, now! There's no hiding instinct.
And with that mother and daughter pair out of the way, we can move on to who I thought was going to be the least interesting character here, Harumasa, whose entire goal is to achieve maximum results with minimum effort. And at first, I really didn't think I was gonna like Harumasa. He seemed like a character that was just kind of there to be a pretty boy, but leave it to MiHoYo to give said pretty boy a tragic backstory and fairly compelling character traits. So unlike other characters in Section 6, we don't actually know a lot about Harumasa's past. Just that he had a master at some point who taught him how to fight, and that he's always so sleepy because of reoccurring nightmares. But we do know that he has a debilitating disease, one that's very likely to kill him in the near future. This is called Ether Aptitude Regression Syndrome. If you remember near the beginning, I talked about people having a certain resistance to ether energy, and when that ether resistance is surpassed, they start to mutate due to corruption. Well, outside of mutating Harumasa's organs all on its own, making him very sickly, Ether Regression Syndrome actually gives him a very high amount of ether aptitude, for some reason. But this is only kind of a benefit and won't really help him in the long run, because of 2 things. First, the disease is incurable, having a 100% fatality rate, and the oldest someone with ether regression got was 26 years old. And Harumasa looks like he might be in his early to mid-20s, so he's running on borrowed time. And second, if he happens to go into the late stages of this condition while inside of a hollow, he's pretty much turning into an ethereal instantly, because that high aptitude that I mentioned before suddenly plummets, regressing down to nothing. And that's kind of what all those nightmares he has are about, him turning into a monster and killing people. So yeah, he really doesn't sleep all that well, which is why he's always napping at work. But putting aside his fatal disease for now, that's all we've got in terms of a backstory for Harumasa, outside of a single line on his wiki saying he was a bit of a prodigy. Nothing about his family or upbringing, just that. So I'm just gonna call his backstory The Prodigy, give him the skilled feat to go along with the lucky feat from being a human, and move on to his stats and fighting style. First off, like usual, he is very much a dex character using a bow and short swords, neither of which use strength, and then I actually have his intelligence and wisdom tied at 14. Remember, he's kind of a prodigy and apparently got through school super easy. I would have made his intelligence a bit higher for that, but he really doesn't need it. Next is going to be his strength at 12. After all, you do need that in real life for bows, just not in D&D. And this one might seem a bit odd, but his charisma is going to be at 10. Sure, he's very much a pretty boy, but he really doesn't need it for anything, and I really don't think his fan club would care if it was lower or not. And yeah, I'm putting his constitution at 8. Normally I don't dump con because everyone kinda needs it, but Harumasa's the exception. He is the closest to death in the team, and on the wiki it says that Ether Aptitude Regression Syndrome wrecks your constitution. So yeah, 8. Okay, so let's move on to how Harumasa handles himself in a fight. And if you remember, his whole thing is the smallest amount of work possible for the best results. So naturally he went with a bow for his weapon, solely because it reduces the amount of running he has to do. And being a member of Section 6, Harumasa has his own special bow that splits down the middle into 2 short swords. Again, because he got tired of carrying multiple weapons into hollows. Now he does primarily use it as a bow though, only snapping it in half when enemies get close before he can retreat and swap back. And just like Yanagi, he uses electricity for his element. But don't worry, I'm not putting Gift of the Chromatic Dragon on him. He needs his ASIs for other things, and I'm planning on covering that in a slightly different way this time around. Now looking at how Harumasa fights in the game, he likes to mark certain targets, doing extra damage to them before tasing them with his ult. And while in the past when making archers I would use the fighter, I actually think the ranger is the better option for Harumasa, covering his archery, short swords, and even other abilities with the ranger spells. And I do want a good few feats for our pretty boy archer here, like speedy so he can get in and out of engagements quickly, dual wielding so he can get the most out of his 2 swords, and sharpshooter. He is a bit more effective with his bow, so I wanted to focus on that a little bit more. And each of these feats gives him a +1 to his dexterity, jumping it from 17 to 20. And just those 3 feats puts Harumasa at level 12. But not only is this not a high enough level to keep pace with the rest of the team, there are 2 things I really need to cover. First off is the mark he puts on people for extra damage, and this little surprise charge attack with his swords. And the first one is kinda just Hunter's Mark, but the new ranger actually gets something at higher levels to make their Hunter's Mark a bit better. And maybe worth the concentration that comes with it. And that is the level 17 feature, yep, all the way at level 17. Ranger is still not the best, but that is Precise Hunter, which gives Harumasa advantage on every attack he makes against a target with his Hunter's Mark. And if Rangers got more than 2 attacks, I might understand it being so high, but like, come on, Barbarians get advantage every turn, with the only downside being they're probably more than likely to get attacked at level 2. And not only do Rangers have to wait until they are ready to hunt down ancient dragons before they get advantage, if they get hit, especially Harumasa with his 8 con, they're probably going to drop Hunter's Mark and lose advantage anyway. If it wasn't for Relentless Hunter, making it so Hunter's Mark can't be dropped due to damage. Still not great, but better. But maybe a subclass can help make up for this, and I think the best ranger for Harumasa's hit and run style combat is actually going to be the Hunter, which not only makes Hunter's Mark a little better by letting it reveal weaknesses and resistances, but also either dealing extra damage to single targets, or giving him an extra attack against multiple targets. It also makes his escape a little easier with defensive tactics at level 7. He won't even need to choose between the 2 options because the speedy feat already makes opportunity attacks hit with disadvantage, so he can keep it on multi-attack defense and be fine. Plus, being all the way at level 17 gives Harumasa Steel Wind Strike, so he can dive in, slice everyone up, and pull out before getting winded. He can also cover his lightning arrows with Elemental Weapon and Lightning Arrow, which I actually think fits his ult perfectly, turning an arrow into a bolt of lightning that hits for 4d8 damage and forces everything within 10 feet of the target to make a save for 2d8 damage. And if he upcasts it, the total damage goes up to 10d8. Plus, it only takes the place of a single attack, so he can still make 2 other attacks if he has Hordebreaker active. Overall, his best damage per round without crits would be against a group of enemies, and would look something like this. Each of Harumasa's attacks is 1d10 plus 1d6 plus 5 for an average of 15 damage. Hunter's Prey would make the damage from Hunter's Mark proc twice once per turn, for 49 damage, split between 2 to 3 targets. Or he could replace one of those attacks with a 5th level Lightning Arrow, trading 1d10 and 1d6 for 6d8 to one target and 4d8 to that and everything else around it within 10 feet. For simplicity, let's say 4 other creatures are within 10 feet, for a total of 26d8, for an average of 130 split between 5 targets, and then another 34 on top of that since he still gets to make his extra attack and Hordebreaker attack, leaving him with around 164 damage if he can get all the creatures within 10 feet of each other. And that's not that bad at all. He actually outdoes Yanagi for damage as long as it's to multiple targets. But it's not like there's a single spell he gets at level 17 that could outpace this, right? Yeah, Steel Wind Strike is just better. It hits 5 creatures for 6d10 force damage each, so 40 damage per hit for 200 damage. And that doesn't have concentration, so he could add 1d6 to each of those for a total of 220 force damage. That's actually the highest damage in a single turn so far. The only issue is it's split between 5 different targets and he can only do it once. But still, I think Harumasa is a great asset to the team, willing to throw his life into harm's way to get the job done, and even if he complains about it the entire time, he's still gonna get it done.
Sorry, little proxy, but I can't let this thing exist in the world. I guess this was my final vacation request.
No, don't go, please.
Okay, so, Miyabi, you can do... Where'd she go? Oh no, she's daydreaming a training session again. Okay, she's gonna be like this for a while, so let's just leave her be. Hoshimi Miyabi, a Void Hunter, one of the strongest people in the city of New Eridu, and the creator of the Hollow Special Forces Operations Section 6, or just Section 6, whose job it is to dive into hollows, saving civilians and killing ethereals. And while Miyabi might be the chief and founder of Section 6, most of the actual paperwork gets done by the second-in-command Yanagi, who we talked about before. Miyabi is not the best at paperwork, and even after months of being the leader of her own sections, she still has no idea where meetings are held, and often skips them entirely. She is instead much more focused on her swordsmanship, often daydreaming training montages in her head for hours at a time. But before we get into that, let's talk about what shaped Miyabi into the Void Hunter she is now, starting with her training, and by extension, her mother. Because Miyabi was trained by her mother with a ton of different weapons, she taught her manners, how to read and write, and just about everything else. But the most important thing that Miyabi would take from her training into her adulthood was her training with a certain cursed weapon passed down through her family. And things for a while seemed good. Sure, her father's not really in the picture all that much, but who needs a dad when you have a mom this good? Yeah. A hollow of some sort opened up, and after seemingly fighting a horde of ethereals to protect Miyabi, her mother succumbed to ether corruption, and rather than turn into a monster in front of her daughter, she gave Miyabi her final words, and then had Miyabi execute her. And she's maybe 10 years old here, so hooray for childhood trauma! Now, while this entire event did clearly traumatize Miyabi, it also pushed her to get stronger, to protect those that can't protect themselves, even if that meant going against orders. And on that note, I think it's pretty clear that Miyabi is a soldier. You could probably stretch noble to fit as well given her backstory, but both are fine. Her species is a little more interesting though. In ZZZ, she is what's known as a Thyrene, just people with animal traits. And last time while building Raftalia, I made her a Tabaxi, but this time around I want to look at the other option, the Shifter, of which there are 4 different types that give different buffs while shifting. Beast-Hide Shifters get temp HP and a bonus to their AC, Longtooth Shifters have a bonus action bite attack, Swift Stride Shifters are fast, and Wild Hunt Shifters are kind of busted, where no attacks can have advantage on them if they are shifted. And because with Miyabi we actually want her to be really fast, the flat plus 10 movement speed boost from Swift Stride is going to be our best bet. This also gives her dark vision and some skills, but the main point is the shifting. And with that we can move on to Miyabi's stats, but I want to get through this fast. I would rather not have another 40+ minute video to edit. So, starting off with her highs, being Strength at 16, Con at 15, and Charisma at 14. She's by no means clumsy or anything, but the best weapon for her is going to be somewhere along the lines of a longsword, and nothing in 5e that uses both of your hands is going to go off of Dex. Speaking of Dex, it is her next highest stat at 12. She has plenty of training with lots of weapons, but clearly has her preferences with heavier things. And she'll be able to make up for the low score later with some abilities. Then 10 in intelligence, she's smart enough to do her job and create her own branch, but she lets Yanagi handle most of the actual paperwork. And her wisdom is all the way down at 8. She on the regular spaces out daydreaming up fights in her head that could go on for hours if you aren't lucky. And this stat spread actually gives Miyabi a few options. The strength and charisma could let her go into paladin, which could work really well for her swordplay, but the same could be said for fighter. So I think to actually pick her class, we're going to go back and look at that sword that she inherited, and may or may not have stabbed her mom with. The cursed blade passed down through her family that has a demon trapped inside of it. And you know, using a weapon that gives you more power while also trying to corrupt you and make you kill people, and has a goddamn demon stuck in it that is sealed via a specially made sheath, I think our only choice here is to go with the... Okay, sorry, but before that, I think we should start where she starts. Miyabi's training is clearly focused around weapons as a whole, and while part of that training, yes, is to learn how to use tailless, just holding onto that sword doesn't make her strong. So before I tell you the class that I'm sure you all have already guessed by now, I think a quick start of 3 levels into the Samurai Fighter subclass is just what Miyabi needs. Meaning she gets great weapon fighting for more consistent damage, weapon mastery, and the main feature of this subclass, Fighting Spirit. Giving Miyabi 5 temporary hit points as a bonus action, and making every single attack she makes after that rolled at advantage. Which will really come in handy here in just a bit. Because yes, the main class Miyabi is going to be focusing on is the Hexblade Warlock. And given how high level the rest of the team is, and how strong Miyabi is compared to them, I honestly think she might be one of the stronger characters I've built. We'll just have to see. Right off the bat, this subclass gives her Hexblade's Curse and Hex Warrior features, so she can curse targets for bonus damage and crit more often against them, although Hex Warrior isn't super useful given that she started as a fighter. Oh, and like usual, she can skip the level 6 feature, Accursed Spectre. It always just kind of feels out of place. Now when it comes to feats for Miyabi, we have a few to look at from the past. Her killing this giant thing in under 3 minutes, and even losing an arm in the process. Her fight with this other giant ethereal monster where she fails to do a proper Virgil impression. And during her brief fight with Bringer, she easily overpowers his full power attack, shattering his sword and slicing open a hollow. So we've got a lot to cover. First off, Miyabi makes a ton of attacks while also being very mobile. And somehow, outside of the monk who only gets to use unarmed strikes, the warlock is now the only other class outside of the fighter that gets to make multiple extra attacks. In the form of Thirsting Blade for 2 attacks and Devouring Blade for 3 attacks once per turn, as long as they're using their packed weapon. Combine that with Action Surge from being a fighter and that's 6 attacks already, which is pretty good. And to get Devouring Blade, Miyabi is going to need to be at least level 12 in Warlock, meaning so far she is a total level of 15. I also went ahead and gave her these invocations here, some of them just because, like Armor of Shadows, but Eldritch Mind gives her advantage on concentration checks, and Life Drinker ups her damage a little bit. But these are just her normal attacks. I still want to get this. Whenever she actually releases the power of Tailless, which I think there is something perfect for, we just need to get there. First, being a level 12 Warlock means that she is going to pick up some feats. So say it with me, she takes Gift of the Chromatic Dragon. I have no way of knowing if you said it with me, but I hope you did. This is going to be used for cold damage, even though her weapon is on fire, it's cold fire. But after that, she is going to be very strength forward, so a +2 to strength at level 8, and a +2 to charisma at level 12. Also being at this level gives her a 6th level spell via her Mystic Arcanum. And for Miyabi, I think the spell Investiture of Ice, given her icy flames, is a good pick. You could also take the fire version if you want. But after level 12 is where things are going to get more interesting, so let's see what we're working with here. Because again, I want this, and the only way Miyabi can get that is with an old spell from 2014's version of 5e that hasn't been updated yet. And that is going to be the 9th level spell, Blade of Disaster, meaning she is a level 3 fighter and level 17 warlock, giving her Master of Hexes, some more spells, and a +2 bump to her dex. But looking back at Blade of Disaster, I kind of remember it being seen as a bad spell, but I'm not sure why. It's only a bonus action to cast, lasts for 1 minute with concentration, which Miyabi has advantage on. On cast, it makes 2 attacks for 4d12 damage each, and for every bonus action you use on your subsequent turns, it's another 2 attacks. It crits on an 18 or 20, And when it does crit, it deals 3 times the damage, not double. So that's 12d12 or 84 force damage per crit. One crit from this spell is around the same damage as Soukaku can put out in an entire round. So like I've done with everyone else so far, let's look at what one round of damage looks like for Miyabi. Assuming Miyabi already has the target cursed, she is going to make a total of 6 attacks, each one dealing 1d10 plus 4 from strength, plus 6 from the curse adding proficiency. On the first attack, she gets 1d6 from Life Drinker and can Eldritch Smite, dropping a 5th level spell slot for 6d8 force damage. And lastly, 1d4 cold damage from Gift of the Chromatic Dragon, meaning her first attack does around 53 damage, with the other 5 attacks hitting for around 19, for a full round of 148. That's a lot less than I thought. Oh, right, she didn't use her bonus action yet to cast Blade of Disaster for another 2 attacks, each one dealing 4d12 damage with a super high chance to crit for 12d12 instead. So with both hitting but not critting, that brings her total up to 204 without any crits across the board, despite her having a higher crit chance on her normal attacks and an even higher one on her spell. And if she did crit Blade of Disaster, that would jump her damage up from 204 to 260 or 316 if both crit. It's no wonder she's imagining training all the time. I doubt there's anyone alive who can actually give her a proper challenge. Sadly, no matter how strong she is, nothing she can do is going to make her any taller. Oh wait, no, she heard me. Okay, another long one, and my voice is dying, so let's get through this. As per usual, another thanks to my testers for looking over these builds, and to my patrons for voting on Section 6. Remember, if you guys want to see more ZZZ stuff or more MiHoYo teams, help make this video do really well and I will add them to future polls. But that is going to do it for today. I will see you all next time, and as always, have a wonderful day.